This video is a part of the series Anti-Statism at Light Speed and will deal with roads, funding for public goods, and deal with police and schools at their own length. So let's look at roads. Roads are one of the first things people ask about in a stateless society and are a great opportunity to put this whole emergentist thinking into practice. First, let's divide the issue of roads into two broad categories. First, the arteries, that are the long stretches of roads over undeveloped areas, highways, and the capillaries, that are the woolly network of city, street, and neighborhood roads. And the reason I divide these two should become clearer once I put forward my solution for the capillaries. Now let's deal with the arteries, or the long stretches of road over undeveloped areas, the interstate highway system, as it's called today. Highways not built by the state already exist and can maintain themselves through tolls. These tolls can be stopping at a booth to pay, or they can be a little electronic scanner, such as with the fast track system in Southern California. Or they can be a certain and the colored sticker you are required to have on your car changes every month, or something like that. And there's lots of ways that this can be done. So the issue for highways is for the most part already solved, and we have a little bit of a preview of how roads in the absence of a state would look. And perhaps you yourself can remember some ways it was solved, or imagine how you could run a road so that it was efficient, cheap, and always had easy access. For example, having road maintenance being done at the wee hours of the morning instead of in the middle of the day like it's done today. And of course the state can do that in the middle of the day because it's a monopoly. Or allow people to have free access to a road for a month, kind of like a free trial, or something like that. Since roads would no longer be free to use, we could expect less people driving and more people carpooling. We could also expect people driving smaller cars, as smaller cars tear up the roads less. And as a road owner, I know I would charge more for vehicles that tore up the roads more. And this is similar to how the old turnpikes charged more for wagons with wider wheels. Today, the roads are funded collectively and are free to use. And this leads to a tragedy of the commons. And what is the tragedy of the commons? Well, let's take an example. Let's say you have a common pasture open to a bunch of shepherds. And the shepherds, what they will do is they will graze their sheep and eat as much grass as they can, because if they don't eat it, someone else can come in and eat it. Similarly, if roads are socialized, then what people will do is they will drive on the roads much more than if they were actually paying for the cost of their wear on the road and the amount of congestion that their car causes. By making each shepherd pay for the grazing of his sheep, that is the amount of grass taken out of the pasture, the shepherds won't graze his flock on the field so trivially. And so the health of the field will be maintained and will be, end up producing more grass in the long run. Similarly, by making each driver pay for his road usage, he won't take so many trips and won't take trips for such trivial reasons, and he won't drive unnecessarily large cars as much because he'll be paying the full cost of those cars, instead of having those costs socialized onto everyone who pays taxes. This would make trains more competitive as well, since a road trip now costs more than just your personal expenses and gas. As a road becomes more congested, the cost of the road rises until it is no longer congested, or that's how most private highways work. And this reduces the number of cars on the road, and the remaining cars are willing to pay the high prices because it's no longer congested. It's a nice road at, rush hour. Quote, public, close quote, roads tend to lack this equilibrating mechanism, and so state roads are a complete mess in terms of congestion. Of course, a highway requires arrangements with other roads to provide off-ramps and on-ramps, and whoever owns those roads must make arrangements as well with the highways. Some argue that large highways require the state to use eminent domain to force holdouts to sell at a reasonable price. Otherwise, they say, holdouts could charge $1 million for a speck of land just because it's on a route of a planned road. And the way to solve this is with options. As a road builder trying to buy a route, you buy guarantees to buy a plot of land at a certain price. And you keep this arrangement in secret. You say part of the contract is they have to keep it a secret that they have sold an option to sell their land. And maybe the contract is that you have to pay the property owners $1,000 each for a guarantee to sell the land at a cost that it was appraised at in the previous year, plus perhaps some inflation adjustment, or if this is a stateless society, a deflation adjustment. or whatever. The specific arrangements can get technical in order to deal with whatever trickery that there could be, and that's an entrepreneurial issue. I'm just dealing with this like an economist at a more meta level, saying this is how it can be done, what the specific contracts are, where the specific routes are. That's for the entrepreneurs to figure out. Then, once you have done this, you buy up all of the land at once, and then you have a full route. If you cannot do this, if you cannot buy up all the land at once, as you have not purchased all the options, then you have wasted some time and money, but far less than if you had actually bought up all of the property along the route until you got to like one jerk holdout who's now charging $1 million for his little plot of land. This is certainly less effective than eminent domain, and it will make private highway construction in the initial building more difficult than government highways. Whether or not this offsets the gross mismanagement of government highways is not something I can answer, but it is in my opinion that it does in the long run. And but of course I would be biased that way. I would say that, wouldn't I? But the thing is, once the land is acquired, the superior management of non-state highways would overcome the initial increased cost from a lack of eminent domain, in my opinion, in my prediction. However, highways would be built to the extent that there is real demand for them, and so the fear of there not being highways if there was no state to build them is unfounded. At worst, there would be less of them. What I predict is that there would be less of them as well, but that there would be no shortage of them, and traffic along these highways would be smoother. Now, the capillaries. The street and neighborhood roads are a bit more tricky than highways. Capillary roads done by non-state entities are built and maintained today by housing developments, shopping centers, and parking lots. Probably never thought of a parking lot as a private road system, but it is. And when we look at these developments, what we see is that capillary roads, unlike artery roads, are not owned by a road company trying to make money off of the road. They are owned by the surrounding property owners who need roads for their homes, work, or whatever. And having the surrounding property owners also own the roads prevents so many possible headaches. So what would happen is all of the municipalities would have the roads in that city be owned by a firm. Hold on. And everyone in that city would have stock in that firm depending on how much property they own within that grid. If you own 10% of the property in the grid, you own 10% of the stock of the firm that owns the roads, which is to say you own 10% of the roads on that grid in abstraction. However, it's not like everyone gets their little slice of road out in front of their house, as that would lead to some people erecting toll booths on their 3-yard plots or whatever. What would happen is that you would own 10% of the roads on the grid in abstraction. You could call this firm a corporation, as it does involve stock, but it doesn't fit the typical conception of a corporation as we know it, and so I prefer the name communitarian firm, or CF. Now, this CF stock doesn't necessarily pay any dividends. In fact, it actually requires you to pay to maintain the roads and to hire a few guys to tow cars that have been camping around the grid for too long. Of course, if some family from another area visits and their cars have stickers that say they're from another CF, that's fine. You're probably not going to tow them. Even malls today, which are much more concerned with profits than a neighborhood, they typically write a letter to a car and stick it in their windshield wiper before they tow them. And so what I would see happening is that a car that was parked for a while, it would be assumed that this was a family, a relative of someone who is paying for the roads. If this person, remained camping out there for like 2 weeks or something, then a letter may be put there saying, hey, what's going on? You've been camping around here for a while. We have a policy to allow traffic to go through, but, we're not a free parking lot. But what this would do is this would allow the holders of stock to also vote, like in a corporation. And so the CF would have a charter. So to have road access on your neighborhood, you would have to own a share of the road CF of the grid your property is on in the proper proportion. If you don't buy your appropriate share, you won't get access, which makes sense, as basically you would be a trespasser. This is like a shopping center or a mall where if you want to own a store in that mall, you have to pay your share of the private parking and side road structure, along with whatever other collective things need to be paid for. But one of those things to be paid for is the roads. It's different, though, what I advocate, in that unlike a shopping center, which is an overtly collective arrangement, you do in fact own your home and the land it is on in my proposed system. With the mall company can actually shut down a store that doesn't pay the bills. The road company doesn't own your house. They can't shut down your house or take your house. They only own the roads, and so all they can do is shut off road access. Now, of course, private parking lots and private streets around shopping centers grant free road access to strangers, and 99% of the time, it's not a problem. And practically speaking, these road grids would all be best off 99% of the time just allowing traffic to pass through freely, as that allows for reciprocal travel. And the people who own stock in these these communitarian firms, they're not in the road business. They're in the life business. And they want to be able to drive around on these other grids, and they don't want to have to think about what grid they're on. If a certain street gets free rid too much, then the grid may elect to erect a toll or to limit traffic on that street in some way, kind of like how it's done today. That is, if a street becomes known as a through street, sometimes they will erect barriers to say, no, this is for the people in this neighborhood only. Use the main grid. I know it's congested, but you're not using the roads that are next to our houses. So how would the CF catch people who didn't pay for their share of the road but still used it? Well, simple. They would just put spikes outside of the driveway of the property of the non-payer. As soon as he buys his share of the CF stock, the spikes will be removed. Or they can just find and boot his car and remove the boot when the property owner buys the appropriate amount of stock. But given how little it is, perhaps $200 or $300 a year to maintain the roads, it doesn't seem really to be worth it, and I think that this problem would be negligible. A danger of this solution is that people could vote that in order to maintain stock in the road CF, you would have to also pay for all sorts of dumb welfare schemes. And so this could be used to impose a involuntary welfare system, or a functionally involuntary welfare system. But the thing is, this would be limited naturally in two ways. First is by people just choosing to give up their stock and not have a car if the schemes got too bad, if the schemes got out of hand. I know I would give up my car if it would get me out of paying for Social Security, for income security, for Medicare, and all the other BS that the state is spending money on. I would give up my car for that, and so there's that limit on the abuses done by this. Second is that you can move to another road grid, or you can go out to undeveloped land if your neighborhood starts getting socialist, we'll say. So today, the state claims vast tracts of undeveloped land, and so today, starting a new development won't help you escape the tax man. Even going to a new state won't allow you to escape federal taxes. But in a stateless society, going into a new area would allow you to escape whatever BS the road grids were doing, because the road grids don't own the entire Southwest. The road grids don't own, the entire planet. They just own the roads that they're on, and so that's all they can do. So you can leave and you can escape quite easily, unlike with the state. But just in case these natural regulatory mechanisms are not enough, I propose having the charter require 70% support for any change in policy, and to limit the CF meetings to at most once every 3 months. And you want to limit the number of meetings to prevent, flash mobs, people coming in and ramming something through when everyone else is asleep. But even that shouldn't be much of an issue, because you would require 70% support for any change in policy, and that 70% would be of all stockholders, not just all the voters. Okay? Meaning that to even have a quorum, meaning to even propose a policy change, you have to have at least the people who own 70% of all stock in that grid in attendance. And if you had just exactly 70%, then you would have to have unanimous support for that 70% to get anything done, and you kind of see how that works. And this is to prevent transient fads from being imposed, but it would still be loose enough to be used as a last resort for the funding of public goods, which will be dealt with in a few minutes, as you can see from the title of this video. This system of grid ownership is already in place in new housing developments and in shopping centers and in parking lots in a modified sense. So one can think of the road CF as a street lot. What I'm trying to do with this system is to have capillary roads owned by the other property owners. And what that will do is that will prevent the road barons, the local road barons. But I also don't want to force individuals to have the ownership of their homes contingent on buying stock from the road CF. In a mall or shopping center, it is stipulated that you must pay for certain collective services or the mall agency will shut you down, and that's something you explicitly agreed to. But this is not an option with neighborhoods. So, and let's face it, roads, especially roads in circumscribed areas like cities, roads are a natural limited space monopoly, especially in large cities. The way I found to curb the negative effects of this natural monopoly is to have the roads be owned by everyone, so it doesn't make any sense to charge outrageous rates or have tolls every 5 feet, because the owners of the roads, the whole of society, would just be charging themselves. In housing developments, they have neighborhood private roads. They don't have tolls everywhere. It makes no sense because they would only be charging and inconveniencing themselves. Having other property owners also own the roads prevents the formation of road barons. Similarly, you don't see shopping centers have tolls every 5 feet to get parking. Perhaps if parking is very, very much impacted, they may require you to pay. But the primary motive of having a road around a shopping center is for you to park so you can get in and buy stuff, which is where they make their real money. I suspect many will say what I'm proposing here is a state. And aside from the common sense thing, common sense response, oh, so I guess a parking lot is a state. But aside from that, 3 responses. First, even if we do say that what I'm proposing is a state, and quite quickly here I fell back into statism from roads, assuming this is true, it is so radically localized and has such strong natural regulatory mechanisms as to be far more conducive to free markets than the current state. It's far weaker and more decentralized than the U.S. was under the Articles of Confederation, and so would still be a grand improvement. It doesn't even claim tracts of unimproved land. It only, in terms of the land claim, it's only claiming the roads. So even if you want to call it a state, it's a very, very weak and decentralized state. Second, it is not technically a state any more than any other form of property is a state. Now, if you're one of those people who say all property is statism, well, sorry. But when you break it down, the communitarian firm is just a non-profit corporation claiming the land which it built and maintains the roads on. Now, of course, ownership is subjective, and that's going to be the topic of another video. But assuming it's you own your home because you built on it and you are homesteading it in some intersubjective fashion, then the determination of homesteading being intersubjective, the road CFs own the land in the same way that you own your home. Third, it doesn't function as a state. That is, functionally, it's not a state because exit is so easy. It functions more like, dare I say, a commune, or, less pejoratively, a town. Now let's put this all together. The highways rely on municipal roads to be worth anything. You don't go on the highway to be on the highway. You go on the highway to go into some city. Any municipal road can simply block access if the highways become abusive, because odds are people who live in a city probably use the highways from time to time, and they're not going to like it if they're being charged stupid rates to use the highway. If this whole thing sounds convoluted and sounds very complicated, well, let's go back to the individual. What must the individual do in this system that I propose? Well, he must get a pass card for highway use, which deducts money from his bank account, or if he doesn't have a bank account, he must get a monthly unlimited access sticker that he changes each month. And he must own his share of the road CF in order to have access to the neighborhood roads. So 2 things, and that's simpler than the DMV. One thing to clarify, I've come to the conclusion that road stock ownership should be based on total area of land ownership, not appraised property value. The problems with appraised property value could lead to the corruption within the appraisal agencies and would result in stock ownership varying wildly and would punish individuals who invest in their homes, thus raising the value of their homes, while rewarding those who allow their homes to degrade. That is, it incentivizes bad behavior and punishes good behavior. There are problems with acreage-based ownership too. The one I can think of is a man with a very, very large house and a very, very big yard, but who doesn't use the roads very much. But he still needs to use the roads on occasion. And then there's the guy who, you know, lives in an apartment and he drives on the roads every day across the entire municipality to get to work. So he's paying a lot less for roads than the guy who owns a big, huge estate, but only uses the roads occasionally. So the system that I propose is not perfect, and I don't see any way to get around this problem without introducing some government-like powers to the road CF. That is to create an even worse problem to solve this problem. But the thing is, in a state, that guy with the big estate, he would be paying property taxes anyway, and almost certainly would still be paying less in my proposed system than he would under a state. One silly argument against stateless roads is the easement issue. Some bring up the scenario of a road company building roads around someone. That is, they'll build a road, a donut, around your house, around your property, and then twiddle their mustache and say, "Ha ha ha, you can't get out unless you pay me $1 million. That is the toll to pass this road that I have built around your house in a little donut." So, now if you can allow me to skip ahead for a moment. Current U.S. law allows individuals to pass over streets freely on foot and on non-motorized devices, and unless people are completely mad, this precedent will be upheld in stateless law. Furthermore, you could just have a law saying, no, you can't do that if you're preventing easy access, or you're preventing reasonable access from someone to get off their property, then they are to be allowed easements. And of course, there's no way to escape subjectivity here. That is, there's no way to escape the subjectivity of the interpretation of law. But that can be done with within a stateless legal order, which will be fleshed out in the next video. You would have to make some cutoff point. If someone builds a road that extends 5 miles out from their house, then yes, you will be able to cross it and probably even use it if they're not maintaining it. However, once the road gets into their yard and into what we call a driveway, then you cannot cross it, as that would just be a property violation. And I'll hold off on that intimidating topic of property delineation and the enforcement of law. Anyway, the reason I support a stateless society is not because I'm just gaga over the prospect of private roads. I didn't become an anti-statist because I thought private roads would be so much better. I became an anti-statist for other reasons, and one of the tripping points, one of the blocks against anti-statism was roads. So in order to pitch a stateless society, you have to deal with things like roads. And I've done this by looking at what private models work, why it works, and applying it in a way that could work for an entire road grid on a non-profit basis. Because malls and shopping centers, they're all about making money. Neighborhoods, not as much. The solution I presented here is my solution, which of course I think it's best, right? Because it's my solution. But one of the reasons I think is better is because this solution is actually rather simple. I talked a lot about it, and I dealt with a lot of arguments, but if you actually look at specifically what I propose and nothing more, it's actually a rather simple model, especially compared to Walter Block's solutions, plural. Now, Walter Block wrote an entire book on the subject, which I'll link to in the description. My problem with his plan, in summary, is too many moving parts and too many opportunities for the formation of limited space monopolies. He goes into details about how stoplights will be distributed, how each individual road owned by each individual road corporation, kind of like how I propose with arteries. Only for Walter Block, everything's an artery, very few capillaries. That's his road organization system, and so he comes up with all these schemes for interaction between arteries, and that's what I said, too many moving parts. That said, roads charging monopoly rates for their use is not the end of the world. States already charge basically monopoly tax rates to maintain the roads. So if that was the price for ending the state, a bit more expensive and poorly maintained roads, I would pay for that in a heartbeat.